A question was posed in a QA forum that really struck me. Are phone calls obsolete? Our society has witnessed the transformation from landline phones being in every home to having a mobile phone, and often several mobile phones, in a single household. I can get updates from my friends and family on social media. I get updates when there's sales going on at the store. I even get text reminders from my dentist's office to let me know when I have an appointment. None of this was possible just a couple decades ago. You can't help but to wonder what the viewpoints are about phone calls. And before you make a decision, let's consider a few factors. Tonight, I'll dig further into the question about phone calls being obsolete. First, I'll cover how phone calls being obsolete all depends on the area that you grew up in. Next, we'll discuss situations where a phone call is preferred over a text. Last, I'll cover how your occupation plays a role in your phone call usage. Now, I'm going to warn you up front. I'm a phone guy, and I have a slight bias with phone calls being obsolete. But enough about me. Let's dig right into this. As I transition here, the area that you grew up in is an important factor with phone calls being obsolete. We're in a time right now where we have an abundance of communication options, things that were just limited to our imagination several decades ago. Anyone remember the Jetsons? Anybody remember the Jetsons? That's good, that's good. I remember watching the Jetsons and wondering, how can I get my hands on a video phone? That would be so dope. Anybody remember Penny from Inspector Gadget? Yes. I have a little secret for you. Did you know she had the first Apple Watch? Those devices were dreams that have become a reality today, and it's amazing. So I'm going to take you back just a little bit further about with phone calls. Now, there was a time where the phone actually plugged into the wall, and that's how you made a phone call. It's kind of hard to believe. I mean, we're wireless right now. And that contact list that we grown accustomed to, do you know where that was when we didn't have cell phones everywhere? It's in the brain. That's where that contact list. And the most important numbers that were up there, stuck up there. The non-important ones, I don't know. I don't know where those went. And I'll tell you what, to this day, my grandma has had the same phone number for the last 30-something years. It is amazing, and I still remember it today. I know my brother still remembers it today. And before we had this cool stuff with FaceTime and Snapchat, we had these sessions back in the day that was called mouth time. I know you guys are used to FaceTime, but back in those days it was called mouth time. And I'm going to tell you why it was called mouth time. Because we would talk on the phone for hours and hours and hours. I remember back in the day, my girl, who's now my wife, we would be on the phone for hours at a time. We would be looking or talking to one another and then falling asleep on the phone and then just checking like, babe, are you still there? Like, yeah, I'm still here. Those were the days, mouth time sessions. And honestly, when I was growing up, I thought if you had 2 phone lines in your house, I thought you were rich. Just saying. But phone calls were a big upgrade compared to what we had back in those days. It was a big upgrade over writing. And then if you wanted to communicate with somebody, sometimes you have to wait to see that person in person. But phone calls, that's the best we could do at that time. So maybe you're thinking, Jamal, this is a great history lesson. But that was in the past, and nobody really cares about phone calls these days. Well, that's a good point. And that's going to bring me to the next thing I want you to consider. How complex is your topic? Now, think about those times we're involved in a deep, hour-long message exchange. And then what happens when you're texting and that person stops responding to you? You go to sleep, and then you get a buzz in the middle of the night And it's that same person that wanted to continue that conversation, like, look, dude, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to do this anymore. And then what about those times where you're in that text message exchange and you get that text and it's the size of a small novel and it's out of order too? Who has time to decode that? We all have busy lives here. We don't want to figure this stuff out right now. So maybe those thoughts could be expressed in a short 5-minute phone conversation. We get on with the rest of our lives. And if you needed to relay time-sensitive information, which of the 2 options would you choose? The phone call or the text message? So that brings me to the final point, which all depends upon the job that you do, with phone calls being obsolete. So imagine with me, you are the manager of a hotel, and then you're taking care of the patrons of your establishment. You can't imagine that phone calls are not going to be ringing with people checking in, checking out, and trying to find the nearest restaurant. What if you were a dispatcher in a 911 center? Are you really going to be texting somebody saying, hey, we got to respond to this emergency situation? I don't think so. They're on the phone all the time. But there's no question about it. These examples that I just gave you, they're evolving as technology evolves. And we're in a phenomenal time right now where anybody, anywhere can communicate effectively, efficiently, anywhere around the world in a matter of seconds. I want to recap what you learned about phone calls being obsolete. You learn that the phone usage all depends on the area that you grew up in. You also learn that phone calls also depend on how complex the topic is. Last, you listen to examples of occupations that utilize the phone frequently. Okay, there's one last perspective that I want you to think about. What's your take on phone calls being obsolete?